Hello, good day, welcome back. I'm Reverend Philip Ong, your co-student in God's Word through Salva Vida Ministries. We are in a new series entitled Parables of Jesus in the Gospels. Today, let's talk about the phrase, the end of the age. Let's cross-reference this first in Matthew 13:39. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Verse 40 says, therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. Matthew 13:41 says, the Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness. So the gospel and the kingdom are correlated. Another phrase or another verse we want to look at is in Matthew 24 verse 1. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not say all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Verse 3 says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, in Matthew 13, Jesus foretold the end of the age and used a very distinctive Greek term or phrase. In Matthew 24, the disciples are asked about the same identical term when asking about the destruction of the temple. Now, the parallels between Matthew 13 and 24 are incredible in giving us a better understanding of the doctrine or teaching about that the end of the age was in the first century fulfillment. Now, we are looking at the parables of Jesus in the Gospels. Currently, looking at Jesus' second parable, to the parable of the wheat and the tares. What's very important for us to realize is the impact of Jesus' parables and the integration of Jesus' doctrine or teaching on time of the end in the parables and the rest of his non-parabolic teaching. For instance, in Matthew chapter 13, we have the prediction of the end of the age. Now, what is that end of the age? Jesus uses a very distinctive Greek word for the end of the age, and he talks about the coming of the Son of Man with the angels and the time of the gathering. And so we have these constituent elements and the end of the age, coming of the Son of Man, sending forth of the angels and the gathering. Well, in Matthew chapter 24, as Jesus predicted the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the disciples asked him, well, tells us, when shall these things be? What shall the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, this is a very distinctive Greek term. It is used also in Hebrews 9:26 says, he then would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world, but now, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Now, it tells us that Jesus appeared at the end of the age. Well, he didn't appear at the end of time. He appeared at the end of the old covenant age or Mosaic age. Jesus uses this identical Greek word for the end of the age. In Matthew 13, we have Jesus predicting the end of the age at his coming, with the sending of the angels and the gathering. In his prediction of the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, the disciples automatically linked the end of the age to Jesus' answer to the question about his coming. He says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels. They shall gather elect. But in verse 34 he said, Verily I say unto you, this generation will by no means pass until all these things are fulfilled. So, we have incredible perfect correlation, harmony, unity between Matthew chapter 13 and 24. We have the use of a very, very distinctive Greek term, the end of the age, the gathering, which is the harvest gathering. And Jesus tells us that was going to be in his generation. You see, this is perfect unity, it's perfect harmony. That is what we call scientific interpretation or hermeneutics applied of that verse. Matthew 13 and Matthew 24 are coincide in one direction, one message. Now, as we conclude, how did we determining in this modern teachers of the day, how can we reconcile Matthew 13, the end of the age, knowing now the context, and still explain it? That's the end of the real world. That's the end of time. That's the end of this Christian age. But over here in Matthew 24, we explain it, even though Jesus is talking about the time of the end of the age. And even though he's talking about his coming, and even though he's talking about the sending forth of the angels, even though he's talking about the time of the gathering, well, there he says it was going to be in his generation, and that has to be the first century. But Matthew 13 is not. So what's the principle? Where's the hermeneutical justification? See, that right objective explanation is our foundation to right theology, which means to be consistent, both Matthew 13 and 24 must be fulfillment of the end of the age, i.e. the end of Mosaic age, and the time for the new age coming called the Messianic age. There's a lot of stuff more. See you next week as we say in Salva Vida Ministries, bringing hope, times of trouble, and witnessing God's saving grace. Goodbye.
When the waves of life pull you down and your heart is lost and bound, there's a